Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us here on the Transport Protocol webinar. We've got some really awesome panelists lined up today, and I hope that you're going to be able to give us a lot of insight into the way forward and contribute from an attendee's perspective as to what the protocols are that we can employ to make our tourism transport sector not only competitive but a safe place for our employees and our clients. I'd like to welcome today Francois Colin and Geert van Doorn. Hi guys. We hopefully will have Mohammed Baba and Briggs joining us later. There seem to be some connectivity issues currently, but I hope that they will be able to join us during the webinar. For the meantime, what I'd like to do is I'd like to hand over to Geert and Francois. If you could just in 4 or 5 minutes explain to us
Sorry, can I just interrupt you, Rob? I'm going to hijack you if you wouldn't mind. I'd like David quickly just to give us a quick welcome, and then I'm going to hand over to you again, Rob. So David, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks very much.
Intro.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to the panelists. But I just wanted to, before we delve into the detail around transport, just to give you a macro view about what this process around developing protocols for tourism is about, where it came from, just so that people who may be part of this webinar and may also want to dial into the subsequent webinars we're doing on the other areas of tourism. Essentially, we are trying to channel our inputs through the Tourism Business Council. We had a board meeting last week, and this is high on the agenda of government, is how do we actually open up areas of the economy? What we have here is an opportunity to get ahead of the game. Traditionally, and I'm talking, this is the transport sector, so we know this acutely. Historically, we've always been at the mercy of government, and we've been under the cosh with the absurdity of the NPTR and all the associated gremlins with that. Prior to that, as tourism, we've been bedeviled with visas, unabridged birth certificates. Yeah, we've got an opportunity to craft the narrative in our own way. So what we are looking at is to break the tourism industry into its constituent parts, and we're under the cosh. We've got to do this by Thursday. But what we're doing through the webinar and getting some industry leaders into each sector is to start that conversation. And really what we're looking at, guys, is to get a set of minimum standards that can be applied, minimum protocols that can go out in the various areas. So these conversations is the start of that process. But if anybody has any thoughts, please send them through to us, either on the webinar today or through to SATSA in the next day or two. And together we're trying to cobble this together and be able to hand this over to the TBCSA on Thursday. So that's just a short intro from my side. And then because people may be dialing in, just a quick update. We've been inundated with applications around the UIF and tours support process. Some people are getting money. A lot of people are not getting any answers. So I had a conversation this morning with the CEO of the TBCSA. He's on the job, he's kicking the commissioner's bum, and he will be issuing a statement later today. So that's all from my side. What we're doing with the webinars is they're all being hosted by a SATSA board member. So let me please, without further ado, hand over to Big Rob Heatham, our Vice Chair, and good luck, Rob. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and thank you for the intro there. I think it's very important for our members to know what's going on behind the scenes. Let me take this opportunity to thank David Hanley and their team for all the hard work that I know has definitely been going behind the scenes. Natalia, who's worked tirelessly at putting all of these things together. So there's some really, really great work coming out of SATSA, and I'm very proud to be a member of the organization. So thanks very much, guys. All right, to kick off, I think David set the scene in terms of what we need to achieve. I think it's absolutely critical. We've had some discussions prior to the sessions, and I think it's very, very clear that tourism transport is not it cannot really be lumped with the rest of transportation. We know this because of the myriad of questions. But I'm not an expert in transport, so I'd like to ask Francois and Geert, who are with us today, to just give us a bit of an outline and a sketch of what the scenario is currently, what they see happening in the next 3 to 12 months, and what kind of things we can expect in the future. And from that, we'll start taking some of the Q&As and see if we can put together some of those protocols of best practice. Not unlike the water crisis, perhaps we can lead transportation globally as well. Geert, can I ask you to kick off?
Good morning, Rob. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, panel. Clearly challenging times for all of us trying to fill seats on our vehicles. And I think there is just no hard and fast rule of how to go about with this. I think you actually touched on to a very crucial point, and that's that we need to make sure that we all understand the different segments within the transport sector. Well, maybe to start off with, as you introduced me, I'm Geert van Doren. I'm CEO for Cullinan Transport, and we operate brands Hilton Ross Tours, Springbok Atlas, eKapa, Eastgate Safaris, and On Safari. So we actually focus on quite a wide spectrum, but our main focus definitely tourism. Prior to this meeting, we were actually chatting about where we are and what we're currently seeing. I think people are from extremely negative to maybe, in my personal opinion, a bit naive. But I think one has to be careful not to be overly negative. Tough times are definitely on the cards, but I like to quote the chairman of our board that always says, hope for the best, plan for the worst. In terms of inquiries coming through, we're already starting to see inquiries coming through, quite a few from September onwards. Francois and I had a chat earlier on where I said to him that we cautiously optimistic to maybe reach a 40% mark of where we were in October, November last year, with a gradual build up towards this maybe a 60% mark in February, March next year. But as I said, very cautiously, because we've seen in the past 6 weeks how the world has actually changed. So, and I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next 6 weeks. I think the important thing for us at this point in time is to focus on what can each one of us contribute to restore passengers' faith in travel, and more so their safety on passenger and tourism vehicles.
Okay, Geert, that's great. Now, Francois, can I ask you to jump in and give it to us from your perspective, just a quick introduction as to which segment you play in and what you guys are up to and what you see as the 3 to 12 month horizon.
Okay, I'm not a specialist in crystal balls, but basically, I'll introduce myself first of all. My name is Francois. I've been in the tourism industry since 1989. Mostly in the beginning as a tourist guide, since then as a small business owner, small operator with my own wheels. I do freelance events and ops management and logistics. And I'm also the media liaison for the NFTGA, which is the National Federation of Tourist Guides and Affiliates. You might have heard about it. If not, we can talk about it later. Basically, I'm going to repeat a lot of what Geert has said and what David has said already. So, from my perspective, the main thing is that transportation in tourism is not the same thing as transportation for general public. So we need to be bundled in with tourism and not with transport. That's very important to get straight. The other thing is that there are subsectors, and as Geert mentioned, he's got lots of companies in his portfolio. I see it as large groups, small groups, and private touring. And the protocols are not the same for all three. Then we must also bear in mind that we don't work in isolation. So the protocols have to carry across to different subsectors. An example would be hotel check-in. If hotel and accommodation has got a protocol and transport has got another, they need to match and overlap, and they have to be the same at those areas of overlap. In terms of transportation, you've got wheels, you've got drivers who, let's say they're part of wheels, but you've also got guides, and that's a sector that hasn't been addressed very much. And they bridge the gap between operators and wheels, and they need to be brought into the transportation protocol, I think, more so than into the operator protocol. Finally, the priorities. First consideration is to be the staff and their families. Obviously, we need to cater for tourists, but we need to take care of staff and families and how this affects them. We can't control the behavior of our clients. We can control the behavior of the staff by giving them the protocols to adhere to. So that's where we need to focus. Changes, lots of them are going to come. We need to anticipate the ones we can. The rest, we're going to have to learn to adapt and adjust as we go along. And we need to work on it as an industry-wide team. Now, David mentioned that we can lead, and this isn't part of what I set up for my initial discussion, but this is the first time that we actually have an opportunity to push government the way we want government to be pushed, if we want to say it that way, or at least steer them in the direction that benefits the industry. So in terms of forms and protocols, we need to be compliant when we get to places like sandparks. We need to be compliant when we do cross borders with passenger lists. Maybe this is the opportunity to structure all these things so that the passenger manifesto is a standard document that gets used by sandparks as part of the indemnity. It gets used at cross borders and it gets used on vehicles. So my prediction, as a guide, bookings have pretty much disappeared from now until the end of June. I still have some, June 2021, by the way. I still have some bookings for June this year that are going to fall out. I've got some new bookings for September that have come in as cancellations that are now being rebooked. So maybe there is a bit of an outlook for future work, but I don't see much happening before January and much pickup before June next year. Right, I think I'm off the air for now.
Francois, thank you very much. It's comforting to see that there's a difference of opinion, and you know, that there's a bit of an outline as to the way forward there. Thank you for identifying the fact that there's no crystal balls involved here, but it's really great to have an understanding of what you guys think and feel, because none of us know where it's really going. I saw Anne pop up on our screen here. Anne, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Well, I can hear you great. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today. We had a brief conversation earlier on. Could I ask you just to basically introduce yourself and then just give us a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes of where you are at the moment and where you see the future in the next 3 to 12 months?
Okay, so I have a little company called Info Safaris. We do a lot of road transfers as well as the open safari vehicles. Of course, a concern in the future is going to be about space and keeping social distancing. So from the open safari vehicle point of view, that is going to be difficult because obviously profit comes with numbers, and if we have to limit numbers, there will be an issue for the smaller operators in terms of profit. And adding to that, the cost of having to supply sanitizers and masks and that sort of thing. So that is a real concern, I think, for us. But protocols will have to be set up. It would also possibly depend on what the big operators require from us in terms of sanitizers and masks. And I've seen some suggestions that there's a plastic sheet between the driver and the client, which is going to be interesting. And also the concern would be just going forward with things like road transport permits, because they've been closed. So that would also be an issue. If we can't get those permits from the Department of Transport, we aren't going to have business either. So there's a whole lot of issues, not just about the protocols in place, but I think basically it's just going to have to be hygiene. We're going to have to make sure there's plenty of sanitizers, that there are masks available on the vehicles, that everything is wiped down and cleaned after the clients have traveled. And I don't know about protective clothing. I can't really imagine that on a game drive, but it might be something in the forthcoming future that we would have to think of.
Awesome, thanks. And I think you've raised a point there that came up in our earlier discussions, and I'd like to just go back to Geert quickly. Geert, you were talking about the different types of vehicles, because I guess there's going to be different protocols depending on what vehicles are involved. Could you just run us through the kind of vehicles that cross your fleet and that you've thought of, and how they should be dealt with?
Sorry, Rob, technical issue there. Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. Predominantly, we run luxury touring coaches with a fleet of like and small open game drive vehicles, and like Mohammed, then the smaller vehicles. On the one hand, I almost want to say that with the big coaches, it's a bit easier because you do have a bit of space to play with, whereas I think with the smaller vehicles and the open game drive vehicles, you definitely have more of a challenge. Anne's touched on to a point, and Rob, you and I discussed it last night, and I think whatever protocol we need to put in place need to be A, practical, and B, it has to be economically viable. The thing for me regarding social distancing, it is obviously between that and personal hygiene the two most serious points raised right through this whole event. But I think also that we need to make sure that passengers understand that they have a personal responsibility regarding their own safekeeping, as much as what we can do our best to sanitize and to clean vehicles. Ultimately, I think bulk responsibility is going to be with them. So I don't know, Rob, do you want me to jump just into a few basic points that we were thinking of at this stage?
Yeah, I think it'll be great, Kit. I think, just to cover that range of transport, and then what we can do within that, we can also come back to Francois and Anne for their ideas on that. It's about the protocols and treating the vehicles and the situations as differently as they require, which is why my sense of the conversation is that we don't fall into the traditional transportation segment. Tourism transportation is reiterate the comment. David just made the comment that SATSA, again, through the TVCSA, will keep the pressure on with regards to the MPTR and those legacy issues that we've been dealing with. So, the permitting and the things that we know, now's the time for us to try and resolve some of those issues. But I think let's assume that those things have been taken care of, because there is enough time for that to be handled now. Let's look at the way forward and what each of those vehicle types is going to require.
Rob, I see Mohammed is ready to go.
Okay.
So,
all right.
I don't know if you just want to bring him into the fold.
Yeah, absolutely. Mari, I didn't see you in the corner there. There were if you can unmute yourself and just do a quick introduction and basically sketch us the environment and the horizon as you see it for the next 3 to 12 months.
Good morning, Rob. Good morning, everyone. Mohammed Baba, CEO of Ilios Travel. So I think that it's of course, I think that I've heard the word unprecedented just about every second conversation, every second day. But essentially, looking at where we are, I've taken the view that for our business, we are probably looking at a 6 to 12-month recovery as an optimistic view, in that we will hopefully see international inbound tourism recover within 6 months and build up over the next 6 to 12 months if we are lucky. I believe that what this time does give us is to be able to map out the journey in terms of what travel will look like in the future, and what we need to do in terms of implementation for tourism transport going forward. I think that there are many things that we need to look at, but also appreciating that across the entire travel space, there will be implementation that's brought into effect. And what that means is that I can see that airlines will introduce testing when people depart their point of destination. So I believe that all the measures we put in place in terms of protocols for transportation needs to be done in a way that it doesn't duplicate the measures that are put in place in terms of air travel as well as hotels, etc., but done in a way that is slightly less intrusive, and look at how we measure ourselves against any practices globally, because I believe that the competitiveness in terms of tourism will be incredibly competitive globally, and I think we would have to look at world standards in terms of what we implement in terms of transportation protocol. I can take you through some thoughts in terms of the different sizes of vehicles we have, and the thought process in terms of what I see in terms of utilization dropping from what used to be 80 to 90% to maybe 60 to 70% utilization per vehicle in terms of social distancing. I hope that helps you a bit, Rob.
Mo, can I just interrupt you there? Sorry again to hijack you, Rob. I'm the keeper of the tech today, so I'm going to be militant and ask Mo if he wouldn't inch a little bit closer to his PC, because there's a slight echo happening at the moment. I just want to make sure the user experience is okay. So there we go, shuffling on. Let's hear you, Mo. Let's see if that's better.
Is that a bit better?
Still a slight echo. It might be your mic on your PC. Let's give it a go. Sorry, Rob. Back to you.
No, that's great. Thanks, Natalia. I appreciate you. There's so much going on. It's very difficult to keep all the bits and pieces in the air. So that's great. Mohammed, I think we can hear you a little bit better now. So you were talking about range across the vehicles in terms of different protocols that may need to be implemented. But before you carry on, one of the things that I'd like to go back on, which I think is absolutely critical, is in what you've said is in implementing any of the protocols that we do, they have to dovetail with the existing protocols in industry and best practices. So I think we're not duplicating function. The transport sector will be complementing what's already being done in other sectors, because those are the touch points. I think as part of the protocol that we're looking at the individual touch points of the transport sector, our part of the transport sector, and how are we going to manage and put protocols around what we are responsible for. So it's about addressing those areas we are responsible for, and keeping the other protocols in mind as well. So thanks for that, Mohammed. Carry on with what you were going to say about the different vehicle types.
So in terms of what I see moving forward, of course, it does mean that we have to do a review in terms of our product and the product that we offer to our guests, with taking in mind the level of social distancing. So I believe that speaks to ensuring we reduce the capacity of passengers we carry across our fleet. So as Keith mentioned, a little bit easier in terms of coaches, but in terms of smaller vehicles, it does have an impact in terms of ensuring that we still remain globally competitive in being able to reduce our utilization across our fleet to probably about 60% across our entire fleet, but still remaining globally competitive. Thank you, Rob.
That's great, Mohammed. Thank you so much. I'd just like to quickly break out to some of the questions that have been coming through, and I think some of them are of importance to some of the general issues that we discussed previously. Andrea Munster talks about insurances and how we're going to be protecting our freelance guides, drivers, and I would also imagine our direct staff. Who'd like to weigh in on what processes are in place to deal with that one currently, and if there should be anything different looking in towards the future?
Rob, I'll jump in. I think that is one of the basic things that that we've said should come into play. And look, I want to categorically state that there isn't one size fits all. I think for what we envision for luxury touring coaches will be not necessarily work for commuter buses or for small luxury touring vehicles. we went from the perspective of there must be certain basic things that is actually viable and applicable to everybody across this our tourism transport sector. So it's very basic things. So the first point we actually raised was that all drivers and guides must be issued with protective clothing, basically mask, disposable gloves, and yes, it's a debatable point whether independent contractors must actually supply it themselves or whether companies should supply it. But I think it's just that we all need to come on the accept the point that we have to protect, like Francis said, both the passengers, but also the people that's doing the work in terms of people's traveling. And I think a big thing for me there is that drivers and guides need to have very comprehensive training as to how to adapt their guiding style and to actually maintain that social distancing. And I'm not the expert on that, and I'll leave that with Francois and the likes. But I think we need to iterate that drivers and guides need to protect themselves, and I think knowledge is crucial, because they will also need to train passengers as to what is safe behavior on our vehicles. Just one of the other basic points that we've actually raised is that we need to print safety tips and stuff and put it up in vehicles that people can see, almost like the non-smoking signs. And we've already been doing it with some of the Japanese groups, where we have the safety rules that we display on every vehicle that they travel in, be it small or large vehicles. Then one of the other basic things is that we have to ensure that passengers sanitize their hands when they board as well as disembark coaches, and I would prefer to see that with automatic dispensers, just again to keep a bit of distance between the driver, the guide, and the actual passenger. From a coaching perspective, and even in small vehicle, we will be removing high-risk items like window curtains and magazines and that type of thing. And then one of the points, I think, from a coaching perspective that I personally feel quite strong about is that some of the operators work on a rotational seating system through the guides with their passengers. I would like to see a dedicated seating plan where somebody actually used the same seat right for the duration of their tour, almost to create their own safe space where they don't have to actually sit on a different seat every day. As much as we're going to try and sanitize, if you just think on an airplane, somebody walking down the aisle, they touch every seat they actually pass. So we can try and control it by having people sanitize their hands, but I would also then like to see follow on the dedicated seating plan that we actually start implementing stuff like boarding people per row, so that we don't have people bundling together in the aisle, but actually have it out, rather have the group in the open fresh air and then have them board row by row with your dedicated seat. So these are some of the basic things that what we had in mind. I think also stuff like at every stop, fortunately, unfortunately, the driver or the guide will have to sanitize all handrails, armrests, even seat belts will have to be sanitized. And from a company perspective, we are planning on sort of fumigating or using a sanitizing fogger every night in those vehicles, be it overland or at our depots, just to try and do a general sanitizing of the vehicle. And then lastly, just from a coaching perspective, again, I would like to see toilets sanitized and then locked and only used really in emergencies. So that's just some of the basic things that we started to think about in terms of the industry, irrespective of size of vehicle or sector or segment you actually operate in.
Thanks, Geert. That's great. There's some really good points there. Anybody else from the panel would like to weigh in on anything in addition to what Geert has said? Francois?
I pretty much agree with everything Geert has said. Actually, not pretty much, 100%. What I've done is I went through a list that you distributed to us yesterday for setting up protocols. And I spent a lot of the time last night looking at them. And one of the issues is setting up a tracking record of guests. Now, this has been implemented already now with tracking incidents because of guests that were missing in action or nobody knew where they were. So I think the way we can approach this is by having a standard passenger list manifesto that can be used several times. But another thing that we need to look at is a health questionnaire before guests go on tour. And that could be something that SATSA could implement through an app maybe. Clients have to load it on their phones and they have to go through the questionnaire and provide information. This is not accessible publicly, but it can be used to address risks, where you can look at symptomatic, maybe temperature measurement on a daily basis before boarding the coach, boarding by row, as Geert said, seat allocation. And we can learn a lot from the aviation industry in terms of disinfecting the insides of vehicles. I've been looking at what disinfectants are in use, and basically what seems to be the most is broad spectrum disinfectants. The European Union has got some specifications on that. Also, things like ozonation of vehicles when they're in the depot. You know, ozone dispensers or tools that create ozone from oxygen are not that expensive, and they can be left overnight in the vehicle once it's parked. So that's stuff to look at. Communicating with guests is important, but we have to have protocols for specific events. For instance, how do you handle when you get to the gas station? How do you handle when you get to a toilet stop? And those can be industry-wide, and they can be distributed to all the companies. And the guides will need to, the guides and the drivers will need to be up to date with these. So I think that those are the main things that I can identify. Okay.
Francois, great. Thanks very much. Anne, did you want to come in there as well?
I just really wanted to say that obviously this is going to be an ongoing protocol. Wherever the guests are, there will be a protocol in place to sanitize and keep things clean. So I think the onus will just be on us to make sure that we are doing whatever we can to keep our side in order with protocol. But we are going to be very limited because open vehicles by nature are not easy to sanitize. The seats generally canvas and that sort of thing. So it's something we'd have to give a little more thought to as to just how we're going to do it, because it's not an enclosed space.
And that's actually great, because, and thanks to Francois and you for bringing up the next questions that have been put into the panel. Harry asks, can we have clarity and guidelines on, one, how and with what an OSV needs to be sanitized, the open safari vehicle, and two, widely publicizing this process. So I think certainly in terms of two, my expectation would be that the SATSA platform would be a very good platform in order to distribute and publicize the protocols that are decided upon. But Francois, you alluded to a little bit there. Do you and Anne have any particular knowledge in terms of OSV sanitizations?
I must be honest, I don't. It's not something that's come up. Obviously, they get cleaned every time they come back from a game drive, but not to the extent that will be expected in future.
Okay, all right. Look, I think, sorry, Francois, and you were saying there were some guidelines that have been put out?
Yeah, in terms of OSVs, I think the sanitation issue in OSVs is actually easier, although they're not closed, than in closed vehicles, because you have a lot more fresh air circulating when you're driving. So there's that much less chance of contamination. And the vehicles are exposed to direct light. UV is an excellent disinfection tool. So if a vehicle is parked outside, it automatically cleans a lot better than one that is enclosed. The germs have, or the virus has a lot less time to settle down and actually sit on surfaces. So I think OSVs are actually easier to manage than closed vehicles.
Geert? You're muted.
Sorry, I just want to actually add on to that whole challenge, because I know for a fact, and sorry, my dog has just decided to go crazy, working from home. I want to actually compound that challenge, because we're now just looking at vehicles, and you know as well as I do in Francois, we're sitting with the issue of ponchos that we use for passengers on the vehicle. That question of, do you have to buy cheap disposable ones, or do you have to professionally clean them every time you've used them? I think whether on coaches or on game drive vehicles, water bottles that we use, and yes, we do use biodegradable water bottles, but they have to be sanitized before they even get loaded onto the coach. And once they're used, it has to be disposed of in a responsible way, to ensure that we don't spread any germs further. So it's not just the cleaning of the vehicles, everything that goes with that. I'm thinking just in terms of coaches. As a coach operator, one of the standard things we normally do is to have a spare backup microphone for step-on guides. Now, in future, we will not be supplying that, but we'll expect all guides to, just for purely hygienic reasons, to have their own microphones, which brings, again, another level to all the challenges. But I think that's why it's good that we actually talk about these things, because I don't think one of us have actually got the answers all by ourselves.
No, sure. I think that's great. If we can just come to, and I think you guys have started to answer, certainly David answered part of Neil Lyon's question. Biggest question was with regard to the transport permits, where in essence, if we don't have the permits, we're not going to be able to get transportation back on the road in any event. So I think that's certainly something that SATSA has committed to chase and to deal with. And I know David's been working on that. And then on the second note, I think it talks to what you've been mentioning about training and the development of the protocols and controlling what you can control as an operator, as a wheels operator. And that's making sure that your guides, that your drivers, and that your staff, that your equipment and that your vehicles meet with those protocols, and that you have specific processes in place that deal with that. Neil asks whether it's possible to make all of these things available for staff and the equipment easily and availably. Is that something that presents a big challenge for you guys? What kind of time frame are we looking about implementing and training staff to make sure that there's a compliance, and do we have to measure that compliance? Mohammed, can I ask you to weigh in on this one?
Yes, Rob. Can you hear me?
Yep, got you clear.
Yeah, I think that what's important for us is probably to go back to the drawing board in terms of rewriting our policies around health and safety. So it does speak to the introduction of, I suppose, a revised code of practice, which will inform us to rewrite a whole bunch of SOPs in terms of how we see these practices unfolding. I think we will also have to look at what international best practice is. And once we've rewritten this, I suppose it speaks to that process of training all employees to understand that. So I think that as a business of our size, it will probably take us a few months in terms of being able to roll it out to all employees and to implement all the measures across our entire fleet throughout SA. So I do believe we're looking at a 3 to 6 month period to implement the protocols once agreed upon. And I think, of course, as an industry, we want to have a level of consistency in terms of these protocols that's introduced, and then agree on that process in which we implement it and the time frame by which it should be implemented. But I do believe it's very achievable between 3 to 6 months.
Geert, your comment. Thanks, Mohammed. Geert, your comments on that?
I agree with Mohammed, but I want to use a word of caution. Just we have to be careful that our time frame doesn't stretch that far, that by the time we've got the protocol in place and people trained up, that there's in fact a vaccine already. So, you know, to me, I would personally, and only for my own businesses, be focused more on getting it sooner rather than later, even if it means I have to adapt a bit later on to comply to the industry protocol, purely because we are going to have, whether it's 5% or whether we're going to have 20 or 30 or 50% of passengers, what we had in the past, we are going to carry some passengers, and the staff and our systems need to be ready to welcome them and to make them feel safe. So it's a bit of the catch-22 situation that any one of the wheels operator will know that currently our fleets are standing, and it's a great time for doing high-level maintenance, but we don't want to spend the money now because nobody's, let's be honest, nobody wants to see the money go out and no money come in. And it's the same with training. Currently, we don't have guiding or driving work for the staff. So I would like to make that one of those the things to focus on at the moment, purely because it gives people that's currently sitting at home and coming out of lockdown, again, a sense of purpose as to why they are going to do something. So that's just a personal viewpoint. I don't disagree with Mohammed in terms of that it's going to take a bit of time, but we're definitely going to start on a certain level with it. I think, Rob, I want to just jump back to a previous point. And I don't want to touch onto permits and stuff. We all know the challenges. Believe me, we do know the challenges. I think just why this forum is very important, and everybody that's participating in this, and is the fact that from a larger company size perspective, you know, we've been grouped together, anything from permit applications to bargaining council to all of those things as part of the bigger transport sector. And we are not the same as taxi operators. We are not the same as intercities. We need to make sure that we actually raise the points sufficiently for tourism transport. Yes, it needs to tie in with whatever might happen on the intercity side. So that's the one thing. And then secondly, and sorry, I'm raising it because I know we're running out of time. We must, basic principles of safety is one thing. There is a big issue for me regarding the load factor. It speaks to social distancing, but be it that you operate the open top bus in Cape Town, or whether you have a small private tour of 6 or 7 people supposedly on a combi, you need a certain number of people to make it worth running a tour. And it's to find that fine line, the same with game drive vehicles. Sorry, I saw Anne coming in there. It's the same with open game drive vehicles. I want to go back to the point that we can give as much space as possible on vehicles, but at some point in time, people will have to create their own safety within the space we can give them, my opinion.
Thanks, Geert. Anne, did you want to weigh in on that one?
No, just to agree that obviously there is a limit to the amount of space you can give, and there's a line that you have to draw where you don't make money anymore. So you're going to have to look at the maximum amount of people you can put on a vehicle safely. And it's going to be quite critical, I think, for the smaller operators.
Okay, no, and that's really come through clearly. I think I'd like to just quickly go over a question that Christopher raised, or a bit of a comment as well. And I think it speaks to what you guys are talking about now. Firstly, the airlines are already providing a more deep cleaning process. This has been in the media a little bit. And is there a capacity for us as transport operators to take those techniques, which are potentially very similar, and apply those to our organizations and have some kind of formalized cleaning certification that we know that certain suppliers are compliant, that you know that you'll have a certification or a certain process that you've subscribed to? Is that something that you believe is implementable in the tourism transportation sector? Francois, your feelings?
Right. My feelings on that is that for the larger operators like Geert and people like Mega, they have depots and they can afford the equipment. For the small operators that have 1 or 2 vehicles, purchasing deep cleaning equipment is obviously prohibitive cost-wise. But I think a common protocol needs to be set up, and possibly investing in items. I've been looking at what a ozonation device costs. You can get a pretty decent one for about 2,000 rand, which if used over a period of 3 or 4 hours at night, can be used to disinfect aircon systems, which is something that Tracy Mika brought up. And Hendrik Human also mentioned foggers. You leave the engine running, you leave the aircon running, you switch it on, you walk away from the vehicle because it's not good for your lungs. It's the smell that you get when you switch on a laser printer, that whiff, that funny, that's ozone. And that is an excellent way to kill viruses, bacteria, and remove odors. So 2,000 rand for a device that can be used to disinfect is not really prohibitive, and it's something that everybody can have if they have a vehicle. So I think that's one of the first things we should look at. It's not certification, but it is a way of getting rid of problems on the vehicle.
Thanks, Francois. And your feelings on that? You brought up the OSVs and obviously some of the smaller vehicles. Is this something that's within your capacity to implement?
Well, I suppose it would all depend on numbers, because if you've got 3 or 4 vehicles, you can't buy 3 or 4 units because that would be prohibitive. Perhaps we could look at putting seat covers on, plastic seat covers like the ones you get when you collect your vehicle from a service. That is also something that might be more cost effective than an actual ozoner. I must be honest, at this point in time, this is all stuff that we haven't really thought of, but we need to. So all of this is really interesting. Yeah, we'll just have to develop in time, and we'll see what would be the most effective way of dealing with it.
Okay, all right. So if we're starting to run a bit short on time here as we're closing up, I think one of the things that has come out of it is Geert has got his hand. He's got something. Geert, what did you want to add?
Sorry, Rob, I just want to add one aspect to it. We're talking about cleaning and sanitizing everything, and of course it's crucial. I want to highlight also that from our perspective, I would love to see us investing in thermometers for every vehicle, because I think screening would also be quite crucial for us once you actually have that passenger, and not just for the start of the tour, but actually for the duration of the tour, that the guide or driver can actually help screening. And then secondly, and this is just me speaking, I would love to be able to once it becomes available, to use those 15-minute tests on my vehicles, because I think screening complements what we're trying to do in terms of sanitizing the vehicles for a duration of a tour. How practical it would be cost-wise, I can't tell you at this stage. But I just want to mention to you that, and that I think is part of the training that drivers and guides will have to go through to make sure that they are able to help catch any incident before it actually starts influencing the whole group.
Okay, Geert, I think that's a great. Here we've got Francois is busy sharing something with us. Yeah, I can't see it at the moment. Let me just make him bigger. What are you putting up there, Francois?
Hey,
this is a Transportation 101 show and tell. Let's see what you got.
This is 1,500 bucks from Discam.
Sure, I'm glad I realized what that was after a few moments. Okay, got it.
Non-contact thermometer, 1,500 bucks. There are cheaper ones. There are more expensive ones. It uses a single sensor and it gives you a temperature reading. You can use it to detect fever. It's not 100% accurate, but it is a possible suggestion. I think the cheapest ones are probably costing about 900 bucks.
Okay, thanks, Francois. I think just to round up on that respect, I think that all of this is going to feed back to the protocol once the industry, the tourism transport industry, has decided what protocols need to be implemented in order to protect our own business. we're then going to have to look around for those tools. And if I might take the liberty of adding something that came through the discussions that we had prior to this webinar session, I think the capacity now for the big providers and suppliers, and I've seen a lot of comments in the webinar, what are the big guys going to do to help the small guys? I think now is a time where we could leverage our collaborative buying force and make a lot of these items more affordable for everybody. So, you know, it's more of a collaborative thing, whether that would be through the organization or whether it would be through canvassing suppliers. That's something that potentially remains to be decided upon. But I think that's one of the places where collaboration across the industry now could be used to define those SOPs, standard operating procedures, and then implement the mechanics behind them in order to make sure that everyone is compliant. So it's about bringing everybody to the party at the same time. So I know that Geert did offer buying capacity in respect of any of the stuff that they're managing to secure preferential pricing on because of volume. So I hope I haven't thrown you under the bus there in a manner of speaking, Geert, but you did offer yesterday, and yeah, there you go. If I could just ask you guys briefly in a minute to round up quickly what your final takeaways are for this, and what kind of plan we could implement in terms of collecting the information. I've maybe asked Natalia as well if we have a central email that people can drop their support and suggestions of protocol, not necessarily the questions of survival, but how we're going to actually deal with these issues and what processes we can put in place. Can we start off with Anne, just to summarize your takeaways for today?
Yeah, just that it's important that all the protocols are in place, and that if we all band together and we have bulk buying, it would make things a lot more affordable for everyone.
Thanks, Anne. Francois, your thoughts? Just unmute yourself quick.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself now. Difficult. I talk too much. So basically, I think what comes out of this for me is that one size doesn't fit all. We need to look at the whole spectrum, from small operators, individuals that have one vehicle, you know. So we're going to have to set up a protocol which I think is going to have to be top down, and then it needs to be opened up so that everybody can contribute, so that it can be fine-tuned. But as Geert said, we can't afford to waste time. We need to start getting that protocol into place very quickly, even if it's not the final version. And bulk purchasing is definitely a good idea. I think that covers it from my side. There's changes to operation that are also important. If you start doing disinfection of vehicles, what happens on a back-to-back? Do you disinfect between groups, or do you disinfect after every job? You drop off at Sun City, what then? You pick up another load in the same vehicle and come back with it? So those are things we're going to have to address operationally.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Francois. Geert, you're next on the list here. Your final closing thoughts and takeaways?
I thought you're going to leave me to last. That's what you normally do. But I think there's a lot we can do that won't necessarily cost a lot of money. I think we can certainly help each other, and I think you know, in the past, sometimes I got the feeling that there was the transport operator, and then there was, let's say, the driver, and then there was the guide. We need to make sure that we are all working together regarding this. This is a challenge for everybody. The moment we can get the perception out there that it is safe to be on a tourism or on a passenger vehicle, the sooner the better. It would be for the greater good of all of us, and we need to work together for, on that point. And then a last word of caution, and that, again, I have to catch myself every now and then, and just for the record, I still have wine, like I said to Rob, but we also have to be careful that we don't become just so negative that we keep on focusing on what's going wrong. Let's hope for the best, let's plan for the worst, but I truly believe the tide is turning. We just have to push through.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. And Mohammed, last but not least, your thoughts on the takeaways and where we go from here?
Well, we've put in some work to prepare a basic protocol in terms of all the, I suppose, areas that we see as a touch point through the traveler's journey, which I will share with Natalia. So, of course, there's a whole range of different stuff that we've added to the list. So, I think that it will be useful in terms of a start to develop a protocol code of practice for the industry. It will be quite nice because I think that what's important for us to appreciate is that it gives us as an industry an opportunity in the tourism transport space to develop a protocol and a code of practice that can be adopted by everyone that operates within our space. And we've listed quite a few things there in terms of the protocol, in terms of guest tracking, record keeping, point of contacts, arrival at the airport, onboard a vehicle, third-party attractions, communications to guests pre-trip, communications to guests in destination, how we apply ourselves in terms of protective gear and equipment, treatment of equipment, the staff training protocols, and then essentially how we adapt our itineraries to factor in the protocols that we implement. So that's really a bit of our takeout and what we believe we'll see after this.
Mohammed, thanks very much, and thank you guys all for joining us today. Thank you to David, thank you to our panelists, thank you Natalia. I think if I might ask Natalia just to have a closing word as to where we can send the information through to, and possibly get a copy of our protocol doc.
Okay, all right. So you are welcome to send any inputs that you still want to add. Just remember, we have to input this in a couple of days. So please send it to us quickly today if you can, because we've got to collate everything as well. My email address is communications@satsa.co.za. Communications@satsa.co.za. I will also paste it into the chat here, communications@satsa.co.za. But I would also like to hand over to David just to give us a bit of a parting shot, if that's cool. And thanks, Rob, for moderating. It's been great. Next time.
Thank you all for your contributions.
David.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Natalia.
Thanks, Natalia, and Rob. Thank you so much for that. Was superb. Another superpower unearthed there. A superb moderator, and just want to thank the panelists here, Mo and Francois. I mean, it's just great to see industry leadership stepping up to the plate. And I think that the way you guys marshaled the discussion, and also the fact that we are getting like a slew of really useful comments and inputs coming in, I think this puts us, I mean, in a really good space to actually knock some guidelines together by Thursday. I think we should just, you know, as many people have said, let's in terms of what we try and get through, keep it as simple as possible and get the generic minimum sorted by Thursday. There's a lot of higher order stuff and technical details that we can fine tune as the process unfolds. But I just want to thank you all. And I think if we can do it this way, I mean, this really is collective thought leadership in action. So if we can do this, this is what we want. We don't want 100 different people pulling in 100 different directions. So I'm just going to sort of ask everybody to sort of work with us on this, to sort of let the industry leaders and this group that has led us today to sort of manage that process. We'll include as many comments as we can, but we've got to get something in. We're also, just for the record, having a discussion next week that I've already started with our mates in Australia and New Zealand to look at trying to standardize this in terms of at least a sort of Southern Hemisphere tourism offering. So whatever we develop, we're going to be sharing with them. And in my cursory conversations, it would appear that we're actually ahead of both the Kiwis and the Aussies in this respect. They I think, a little bit further down the road on working together around recovery and business support. But whatever we can feed off each other, we will feed back to the industry. So thanks to all the panelists, really appreciate it. But the next 2 days are also crucial in terms of cobbling together your start that you've made together with the inputs we've garnered today. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again.
Thanks, David.
Stay safe. Stay sane.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.